The power of the universe is at your full disposal.
This is the PowerShell Podcast. PowerShell Podcast. It's all about PowerShell and the PowerShell community.
The power of our
future.
Without further ado, please help me in welcoming
Jordan Hammond and Andrew Pla.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the PowerShell Podcast. I'm Jordan with Super Mega Ultra Star Andrew Pla, who brings the high energy to my apathy.
That's right. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
All right. So, I don't know. I guess it feels like we haven't done this in like 2 weeks because we haven't. But what's been going on in PowerShell?
A lot, man. A lot. There's some cool new issues on the GitHub. Some great new stuff, man. Community's been popping. PowerShell Weekly, psweekly.dallas.dev. It's got the hookup.
All right. And this will be way too late for those watching now. Hopefully you attended Andrew's meetup. It went spectacular. I'm looking in the future there.
Thanks, Doug. You did great, man.
All right. So today we have special guest David das Neves, who has hello.
Hey.
So looking through your background, you've got all of the security, and that's just the start. You've done so much more. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me here today. As one exclusion, it's already 10 p.m. So please apologize or bear with me if I'm a little bit already sleepy, but I will give my best. So I'm David. I'm living close to Munich, and in the last 15 years, I've been running a couple of large companies in IT. I started off as a developer, moved then on to some larger companies, which we can also have a look at into dev. And then very recently, I started my own company. Technically, I've always been into .NET and PowerShell. I've been moving a lot into cybersecurity, incident response, unfortunately to say, and very recently also doing a lot of strategic parts. So I'm guiding customers into the digital transformation area and providing them the help. Okay, what is the next step? What are the best next steps to move into cloud? How can cloud be adopted properly? What is actually the value of IT? So this is one of the very first questions in many companies. Yeah, this is what we are doing nowadays.
Wow. Yeah, that's putting it lightly. I've known of you for quite a while. You've had a pretty big impact on the PowerShell community, and it's been really awesome to watch your journey. I think you were actually recommended for a guest for the podcast by Christian Ritter because he was just so impressed with what you've done with your career and the insights and how PowerShell played a role in that. So how did PowerShell play a role in where you are now? Because it seems like it was a pretty big focus of yours for quite a while.
Yes, it was. And actually, I'm still in love with PowerShell. It's still fantastic. Very interesting to say. I jumped very late into PowerShell, so I had like a very steep learning curve. First of all, I was a developer, .NET developer. I learned VB.NET, C#, and jumped into this area. Then I moved into consultancy, and in consultancy, I directly jumped into all of the automation stuff. So I always explain to the people, hey guys, I'm a developer. I don't know what you're doing there in front of the GUI. I don't like it. This can be easily automated. Let me just have a look at it, and I will do it for you in a second. The very first, I would say, huge benefit from PowerShell I had in a support desk. So I was working in the support desk for a large automobile company in Ingolstadt. And this was an escalation support, and we were receiving all the tickets which no one was able to use. We investigated the issues, we tried to identify patterns, and then we started writing scripts. Simple scripts. At the very beginning, it was batch scripting. Then we moved on to PowerShell scripting. I learned PowerShell. Honestly saying, it was quite easy to learn as a former developer. The only thing which I was struggling with was the pipe. This is very unusual for developers. It doesn't feel very intuitive, let's say. But after a time, it was very easy to understand. I was coding large scripts. And very funny story, the more time we scripted automational scripts in the support test, the more time we had to investigate the issues and the more time we had to improve our scripts. At the very end, after I would say 6 months, we already had an SLA improvement over 2000%. So at the very beginning, we were like 12 people, totally crazily overworked. And we didn't know how to handle all of the tickets. And when I left, I think it was like 9 months later, we were playing ping pong the whole time. And this was like our first funny story. Okay, this is the value of PowerShell. This is the value of automation. And then I started very simple. I started blogging. I started going to conferences, to meetups. And things just started to evolve. And this is also the recommendation I can give to the audience. If you want to accomplish something, if you want to gain reputation, if you want to thrive, to be one of the best in something, then just work in the field. Work on the field, start blogging, start speaking, start connecting to speakers. This is the easiest way. Very shortly afterward, I jumped into consultancy. I moved on to Computer Center, which is a large consulting company in Germany. And then I received the invitation from Microsoft. And at that point in time, what I need to say for myself, I'm a typical Microsoft guy. I've been growing up with Microsoft since I was 10 or something. So Windows 3.11. This was my first introduction to Microsoft topics. I was receiving the offer to start at Microsoft. And when I was working at Microsoft, I jumped into the topics about PowerShell security, PowerShell automation, identity. So how can things be automated? SCCM, Windows 10, now Windows 11, to gather a lot of information very quickly. To maybe also to identify security issues, to identify security gaps, and to present them very quickly to the customer. And this helped me very a lot. And I was speaking in many conferences. So I was speaking in Germany a couple of times in the PSConf EU. And I received actually the offer from Tobias Weltner. So thanks, Tobias, if you are seeing this. Afterward, I was also speaking at the PSConf Asia in Singapore, and I loved it. I loved Singapore, but I loved also the people, very open-minded, sharing their thoughts and their opinions. And I think this is also what makes the PowerShell environment and the PowerShell community as one of the best. They are very supportive. They are very inclusive. They are very eager to help you. If you are willing to learn, they will also provide overhours in helping you. This helped me actually to grow my career. So without PowerShell, I would very likely not started my blog. I would very likely not accomplish to join Microsoft and to jump through my career. So PowerShell was one big topic in my career.
Wow.
I like how no matter which PowerShell conference you go to, the EU or the one in Singapore, or it's the same story. It's not like, oh, the people here are great, but if you go to this one, they're garbage. It's
exactly. First of all, you will see Jeffrey's Nova everywhere. So this one is also a typical pattern. But anyways, the people are always very nice and very helpful. And I loved actually to visit the PowerShell conferences. I was also paying for the flights and everything on my own, just to visit the people, because it was like a small family. People also after the conferences, people started to stay connected and to share information with each other. Hey, David, do you have a little bit of time? Can you have a look at this? And this is something which you are not seeing in every community, honestly speaking.
Wow, that's powerful. And it's awesome to hear, because you've been there, you've done that, you've come out the other side. Very interesting. I have a question about your time, working in security, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
How prevalent was misconfigured environments? I mean, obviously, I guess if you're working and there's some issues there, but like, what's your feel after getting to be on the front lines as a consultant and other things? Like, how's the world doing? Are we all pretty far behind? Is it very far and few between the organizations who are kind of have a good grip on things?
Oh, that's a really tough question. Unfortunately, I have not very good news for you. So I've seen a couple of environments. At the time I was at Microsoft, I've been very likely working with more than 50 enterprise companies over Europe and also partially in Americas. And the majority of the environments where I've been, we have seen a very crazy number of misconfigurations. And by speaking of misconfigurations, I'm not speaking about medium or low issues. I'm speaking about really critical issues. The one good thing that PowerShell is able to accomplish, or any automation language is able to accomplish, you can define the policies, you can create configurational sets, you can create open source tools, as there are many, to help the customers to get a feeling and an understanding. But the current issue that I'm seeing and we are seeing today is the companies, they have so many topics on their table that they are not able to prioritize them properly. If I'm doing a security assessment in a very large company and I'm doing just focusing on the cloud environment, this will very likely throw out more than 10,000 misconfigurations or vulnerabilities. So similar level. Technically, misconfigurations are kind of easy to solve to a decent degree. The one thing that is worrying me personally, now you identify there are 10,000 misconfigurations. How do you fix them? What is the priority order of them? What is really critical and what not? The issue is also that criticality, for example, from the CVEs or from the configurations, they are always connected to the reality. So, for example, if you have an open RDP port to a system, this is typically marked as a very critical issue. It shouldn't be there. If there's an RDP port open or openly reachable from the public internet, it will directly be brute forced. And if it falls, the machine is gone. The key question to answer is, how important is the machine? Is the machine connected to the AD? Is it just a test machine? Whatever. And this kind of contextual information is very rarely there. So you just are seeing a large list of red items, and now you hand over this huge large list to the customer, and the customer is saying, okay, I don't have 10,000 of people to cover this. So what we need to do today is we need to provide the customers and help the customers so that they, first of all, they don't create these misconfigurations in the first place. But secondly, when they have been setting up all of these misconfigurations, to provide them a good guidance on how to fix them. And this is, I think, the most critical issue today for most of the companies.
So is that, I guess, a value that going to the cloud has, where you could have your front-end configuration where you've got security holes, but if it's the cloud, then if they're going to stay in business, the back end at least is going to be secured the right way?
Mm-hmm. Cloud has a huge of benefits. For example, in on-prem environments, there's this joke. You ask how many assets do we have to the SOC, to the CISO, to the ID team, and everyone is answering you a different number. And this is especially true in on-prem environments. There's a huge benefit in cloud, especially in inventory and asset management. You, for example, speaking for Azure, you have KQL, you have just the queries, and you can, with automation, handle everything properly. Unfortunately, one thing happened in the past years a lot. So we had this race from DevOps. And we had this mentality, you run it, you build it, you own it. And what happened in parallel was that many teams that were not really familiar with basic security and basic configuration or with operations at all started now to receive this authority, and they started implementing something in the cloud without any control. And this created in many environments a huge issues because they were maintaining their own environment. They didn't know how to do it. And they started building up huge issues over the last, I would say, 3, 4, 5 years. This could have been easily mitigated with policies. So you need to have kind of a policy stack that is preventing the worst scenarios. So this is what I always recommend to my customers. If you want to get a quick fix, then just set up policies for the worst cases, for the worst issues, and then you have already a minimum viable set that is covering you, because these needs to be just prevented, period. But then there are a lot of things where you need to have a look into. Some things, some exceptions you want to accept, some exceptions you don't want to accept, and this is where you need to have a look in detail. Typically, what I was doing, for example, at MediaMarkt Saturn, building up a cloud center of excellence. The cloud center of excellence provides the best practices. They maybe also they provide the templates, and they can help all of the product teams, so the teams with 7 to 9 developers or techies, let's say, to build up maturity. I typically ask the question, how much sense does it make if we have 100 product teams and 100 product teams think about how to secure their Kubernetes clusters? It doesn't make much sense. So it makes more sense to have like one dedicated team thinking about it dedicatedly, maybe also with the expertise. So you also have the security architect in there. You have also the people there with experience. And they create an API. So they create an API which is consumable for the product teams. So this would then be called like a platform engineering team. Or they create templates which can then be reused from the product teams, and these templates are just pre-hardened. And this is a huge benefit. And speaking of the cloud has huge benefits to do this. So technically, it's easier. Procedurally, and also from what happened in the past years, it's actually more complex because there is in the cloud itself, typically there's more variance. When you have a look at legacy and on-premise environments, you will very likely see a dedicated Active Directory team, a dedicated server team, and they will be like, this is my server, this is my environment, this is my GPO, and this is what I want to have implemented everywhere. In the cloud, it's like everyone is doing whatever they want. You can be lucky to see hardened Docker images or Docker images which are up to date. In the cloud environment, you are happy to see hardened infrastructure as a service, so hardened virtual machines with the right security baselines, etc. Because the idea or the problem is very easy to explain. Just imagine you have a team or many teams with 7 to 9 people. And now you are telling these teams, all of these teams, you all need to properly build up something and also properly harden something. And now you just have 100 teams. What would be the normal deviation within 100 teams in terms of quality? So you have 20 teams which are doing really, really good. You have 50 teams, they are somewhere in between. And then you have the bottom 30% which are just catastrophic because the people just don't know better. So the answer to your question is the cloud itself is not the problem. Actually, this would be a solution. So with automation and with the cloud tools, it would be easier to harden it. But due to the added complexity and to the ownership of the teams, which are now able to do whatever they want to do, and no one is really having a look at cybersecurity, actually the complexity raised and the issues also raised in the last years.
So it sounds like it's a big problem, a kind of a complex problem that requires a solution that may take changes to both culture and to the organization of things. Like really having to actually think about how you're approaching things, because it kind of sounds like companies could end up in the bad place you described just by the natural transition of things, right? From on-prem to cloud, you just, okay, we kind of know things, but you have to, it sounds like you have to be deliberate with securing things from a policy standpoint from the get-go. And just kind of being deliberate about the whole cultural thing.
Yeah. So typically, what I'm always recommending is the first thing is the culture. I mean, changing the culture is the primarily always the issue. I mean, DevOps is not about technology. DevOps is primarily about culture, and what I'm recognizing still today, and DevOps, the buzzword is already out there for a couple of years, is the people don't know what DevOps really mean in many environments. You are seeing DevOps teams, you are seeing DevOps engineers, and they are just working on the tools side, and they have a dedicated operations team. This is typically a red flag. When there is a separate operations team, then someone is not doing operations, the product teams. And what the way to accomplish this is actually very easy. So you will need an organizational structure to build up IT maturity. So you need to explain and to train all the people on some basic things. Basic things are basic, for example, cybersecurity matters and patterns as well. So everyone needs to know that secrets, they shouldn't be in the repository. Very simple things, but unfortunately still very valid today. They should be knowing about the basics about a networking setup, so flat networking hierarchy versus zero trust hierarchy. What does actually zero trust mean? This is also an issue. We are just throwing more and more buzzwords to the people and to the companies, but no one is really understanding what is actually now the action plan. Everyone is speaking about zero trust, but what is now the very first thing I should have a look at from a company point of view? And in my point of view, the environment should set up a cloud center of excellence. This is always good. So you have like a central repository where you collect all the best practices, where you collect the templates. This is also typically called an enabling team. Enabling team means this team will help others to improve and to grow maturity. And this is like, you can imagine like a SWAT team you can throw to maybe problematic areas, maybe to very highly sensitive product teams, maybe to product teams which are struggling. This is one piece. Another piece would be a platform engineering team. A platform engineering team just takes the overhead from the product teams. The overhead is everything which is just unnecessary to do in terms for the product team. Speaking of Kubernetes cluster hardening, the basic platform engineering, the underlying platform setups. And having these two teams already provides a good basis, because now you have like impactful and scalable forces. So you take also the cognitive load out of the product teams. One issue typically is also the cognitive load in the product teams is too high. So there are too many topics so that they cannot focus on productivity, and they are just jumping from one topic to another. The cybersecurity team is throwing cybersecurity incidents on them on a daily basis, and they stop coding, or worse, they continue coding and they start ignoring the cybersecurity topics, and then you have like a very bad deadlock. And for this, I would recommend also to having like a cybersecurity team. They have a look at the maturity over the teams. They help the teams to improve themselves. So it's always about helping to help themselves, not doing something for them. I mean, some things you can do for them, for example, compliance tests. So this is another team which I would recommend besides the security team. If you have like highly sensitive products, for example, a product team that is working with payment data. And then you have like a compliance team, and this compliance team has only one job. It receives a request. Then it has a look at the architecture, how is everything implemented, how is the process looking like, what is the cyber resilience process looking like. So is there the data, how is it called? Disaster recovery, sorry, it's very late here, sorry. Disaster recovery strategy for this thing. What is the blast radius for this team? And then doing like a compliance check and also a security check. and then like providing, okay, team, you are good to go. So this is the typical setup which I typically recommend to set up in very large companies, because you are then taking the best out of your people. You have enabling teams, which is important, so they help the others. You have a platform team. The platform is just providing the platform. And you have the product teams, which are providing the value. And all of these three together, they are working together. In addition with the compliance teams, which are doing the checks from time to time. And a really good recommendation from my side is so-called team topologies. We can just follow up or add the reference afterward. This is a really good book, which explains about how the different teams should work with each other. So what are actually the interfaces between the teams to work with each other? And many environments, they are just not knowing what their teams are supposed to do. So you have like 10 different teams. The 10 different teams, they don't know how to communicate with each other. And then you have these patterns where deadlocks arise or where they just stop providing any value. So they are doing something, but no one is doing what is actually achieved. And this is then easily possible to make transparent with this interface. So who am I connecting with? What should I provide? What is someone expecting from me? And how can I provide value to the company over the long term?
So, and this is for a lot of it, like with all these teams, it's clearly like enterprise. So if it's a startup, I mean, first of all, a startup, luckily, they're probably not going to have the same infrastructure they got to control. So there's smaller scope, but is it just, you hope you have a rock star in there? Or is that?
Yeah, this is actually a really good topic. There are two things on startups. Startups, on the one hand, have a little bit less complexity. So in large enterprise companies, we have typically the issue that you have like this old legacy applications, you have the on-prem environment, you have hybrid cloud environments. Someone told now to the enterprise companies that it is a good idea to add also now multi-hybrid cloud to the buzzword. And open up 3 or 4 cloud providers to add more complexity on top of it. So for the startup field or the startups that I've been maintaining, this is a little bit less complexity, which is good. So they are typically working with SaaS solutions, connecting the SaaS solutions with each other. And then hopefully directly jumping on the cloud and working and establishing everything in the cloud. The good thing is, when you start in a greenfield environment, you are ready to use cloud native possibilities. So you would directly work with Kubernetes based or even functions as a service based. So directly implemented functions in a cloud environment, which would reduce the overhead, like the infrastructure overhead. But yes, the issue still remains. So what many people don't understand is when you are working in the cloud, it is pretty much the same as on-prem, plus you have the additional configuration layer of the cloud, which you need to have. I mean, you have for example, a virtual machine you have also there. What is good for the startups, there are plenty of good guides out there. So I'm sharing plenty of them on a day-to-day basis. There are plenty of good tools there which provide like basic hardening, basic policies, basic recommendations. Luckily, many the cloud service providers in the last 3-4 years also started to add these policies like the sys policies and many of those more into their environments, and you can natively use them. So my recommendation would be use natively the policies and set up a governance model from the very first day, set up the cloud foundations correctly from the very first day. And this is where the enterprise companies, they have been struggling. So the cloud foundation, speaking of, is you set up a landing zone, you define what is the identity model, you define an airbag model, you define the principle of least privilege, and you set up everything in a zero trust approach directly in the cloud, because if you start in the cloud, you would start properly, and this is then doing it correctly with a zero trust approach. And you also define the networks which are maintained and used in the cloud, and not just like you have been doing on-prem. So I've been seeing a lot of cloud environments and they have just been using flat networks in the cloud. So every machine is able to communicate with every machine in the cloud. Yeah, you can do it like this. Not the best idea. This is something that startups, they need to think about on the first day. And these tools help them to accomplish this, but I'm totally with you. If you don't have any person into the topic, it can definitely be an issue. Yeah.
I'd say the thinner margins make it a bit more of a risk. So enterprise can absorb all these mistakes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not ideal, but for a startup, it can be a bit more. So when they get all the recommendations, how do you treat this? Is it something like, this is something you start working through now, or do you treat it like tech debt, where like for this cycle, we'll try to tackle these ones and they include it within the regular dev cycle? Or is it something where it needs to become its own thing where they're just trying to knock it all out constantly?
Yeah. The tech debt is one of the, I would say, top 4 painful topics for the majority of the companies which have been there for more than 10 years. And the reason being is that tech debt is not sexy. And this is motivating many of the IT leaders and IT managers to take the wrong decisions. And the wrong decisions are the pain of today. If it's not feelable, we can ignore it. But the pain of today, if you ignore it, will be 3 times the pain tomorrow. This is, I would say, what many companies are feeling today. So I'm seeing a lot of environments. There's so much tech debt where the investment of cleaning it up would be higher than just building it up from scratch new. And this is then the point where you as a consultant have to say to the company, I don't know what you have been doing the last 10 years here, but there have been plenty of wrong decisions. In my point of view, I always recommend to clean up as much tech debt as possible. The most elementary thing that you need to do as a company is you need to have the transparency about the tech debt. So as a manager, I have to take serious decisions from time to time, and I'm not able to make everyone happy. So at some point in time, I need to make the decision that I will accept the tech debt to finish the product 1 month earlier to make our customers happy, for example. But the one thing I need to do is I need to keep a traction and a track record of all my tech debt. I need to calculate it, and at the dedicated time, I need to invest into it. Because what happens is, if I keep accumulating tech debt over time, there comes this critical point where tech debt is just killing everything. It's killing innovation, it's killing transformation, it's killing refactoring, it's killing the budget. And what we are seeing a lot is tech debt is at this kind of point very high in many companies, so that we actually have the only recommendation to them to build things from scratch new, because anything else doesn't make sense anymore.
It should be a hard sell, though.
Yeah, it is a hard sell. The one thing I've been seeing, one environment where it was for the business tool or the business value, the IT business value was not able to transform into a modern tool because of the tech debt. So what the team started doing is they started to attach to attach modern tools or modern frameworks, etc., to legacy. And you can guess what happened over time. So the timeline for the product increased by 3 times. So you can just imagine they ignored the tech debt and they paid the ignorance by 3 times. What I would recommend is you at some point in time you need to clean up the tech debt. At other point in times you can start up working other things in parallel. So learning from the past, and then you start building something aside, and then you start keeping track of your record from the very beginning, and you don't build it up from the very beginning.
I have a question about on-prem.
Yeah.
When does it make sense from your perspective to go on-prem with things? Is there a certain scale or size, or are you all in on the cloud all the time?
This is a very interesting question because in the past few years, there was this high motivation to move everything to the cloud. And we have been seeing a lot of companies running cloud-first strategies. And the cloud-first strategies are more like the resignation of the understanding of IT and just the fear of missing out principle. So I don't know what is happening. Everyone is moving to the cloud. So do we also need to do. And this is what happened very often. And the companies didn't build up a proper cloud strategy. And the proper cloud strategy is not only about costs. Speaking about costs, you need to have a plan. How do you want to manage the things in the cloud, and how do you want to get the maturity in the cloud? But the cloud is not only about costs. The value of cloud is agility and speed and so on. You guys know, but many of the companies don't. And there are many things that are valid to still operate on-prem. Not everything needs to be moved to the cloud. Also, there is, I would say, an issue with the understanding. Many companies started moving everything to the cloud, and they started to quickly move to the cloud. So they started with a lift and shift migration. They started to move virtual machines to the cloud. And you know what? Virtual machines in the cloud, they are not very cost effective. Actually, I would say if you start moving infrastructure as a service to the cloud, you will end up in higher costs. There are many reasons for this. The first reason is what many companies just ignore, and I just need to say this, they just ignore. When you move something from on-premise to the cloud, you have the on-premise costs, then you add migration costs like a consulting team, etc. Then you open up the cloud service provider, so you add the cloud service provider costs. You have now 3 times the costs. And then you migrate everything, but what happens is that you don't migrate everything, and the DCs, they don't shut down. So you have the DCs running after 3-4 years, you have the migration still running, and you have cloud running. So you have additional load of costs, and you don't know why, or you don't understand why. In my point of view, when you are having a look at large infrastructure as a service, typically the calculation is better for on-premise. There are typical examples. So for the domains, I would say the telco domain is a typical domain which is worth looking at, also having like this hybrid method, like having large infrastructure as a service for legacy or for high computing stuff on-premise. With SAP, it depends a bit. In the majority of the cases I've been seeing, it was not a good idea to move SAP to the cloud. But SAP, I would always put on the low prio. I would not start migrating SAP systems to the cloud on the first day. And everything that is machine learning related can also be better maintained on premise. So there, I've seen very recently some articles about large companies running machine learning farms on premise because running them in the cloud are just not cost effective. They just need the CPU power and the memory power and the calculation power. For the cloud, it makes sense if you have like variability, so agility. So if you just need to calculate today something and then you calculate 20 days nothing. But if you need to calculate always something, typically on premises always worth a look from a cost perspective.
For those companies where the cloud isn't viable, it's not necessary quite yet, it's always being innovated, everything in IT is, but the cloud in particular seems, so how often should they reevaluate? Like for, I guess the only example I have for my own experience is Exchange. When I was looking at Exchange 365, I couldn't have access to the hub transport role, which I was in a heavy regulated industry, so it didn't work for me. But now that's available, so it makes total sense to go there. So I guess how often for someone where it's a no now, should they reevaluate and see if it fits?
Yes, I would definitely say so, especially with Exchange. So Exchange would be always my recommendation. Move this to Exchange Online. Another thing which I would also validate is Azure Active Directory. Try to or have a look at modern identity systems. Typically, what we need to do is the following. Moving to the cloud is just like one puzzle in digital transformation. So this is very often misunderstood. Cloud transformation is not the story. The story is digital transformation. So why are we actually doing this? So why are we actually moving to the cloud? To provide additional business value to the company, to maybe gain more data, to build up a new business domain, or to improve the agility. And this is just a tool. And this is also what needs to be understood. Cloud is just a tool in the digital transformation area. So when you are having a look now at your whole company, you should have a look at hybrid cloud. So which kind of solutions are necessary to be run on-prem, which kind of solutions are beneficial to run in the cloud. This is the first thing. The second thing is what cloud is really good for, and this is what it's also cloud transformation, is to run the transformations. Because moving to the cloud forces the companies to increase the maturity, the general IT maturity. So you have been giving the example Exchange on-prem, AD on-prem, maybe also NTLM v2 and the old legacy protocols. When you are now moving everything to the cloud, this will be beneficial for you because it helps you to transform your IT maturity to a higher level. So speaking of you work with modern authentication systems. You focus the API first strategy, which is actually a really, really good recommendation. You move to Kubernetes or PaaS servers. You can also run Kubernetes clusters on-prem. So when you are focusing now to keep the things on-premise, the only thing that I want to highlight is, yes, you can do this, but you should not stop investing in the IT maturity. The IT maturity still needs to be invested in. And this could be, for example, setting up Kubernetes on-prem. And you can easily do this with Anthos, for example, is this possible, and with many other tools as well.
So I have kind of a different question because I can see you're kind of passionate about this. And so let's go back to the beginning of your career. What were you hoping to get out of your career? Like, were you just looking for a job? And compare that to now. What are your goals with your career? What impact are you trying to have? What drives you?
So I'm very simple to some regards. So I'm typically loving to work with people. I love to grow people. So I'm typically having a lot of mentees and to help them to grow their career. I'm a typical IT passionist. So I love to work in IT. I love to increase maturities. I love to work with customers and with people. And this is what I do. And I do it because I have fun with it. And also working with the people is always fun. That's very simple, very simplified me. And in the past years, I've been growing up the career. So in the very first years, I started to build my technical career. So after Microsoft, I received to offer to join Google in the professional services team as a program manager, and I've been building up more my technical expertise. And then I started to think about, okay, technical career ladder is fine, but I want to have a look at the other side. So to put myself always in not comfort zones, so uncomfort zones. So to learn something new, to understand what I actually love to do. And I jumped on the track to the IT manager. So I was an IT architect at Munich Re for the whole Azure environment and for the Windows servers. And then afterward at MediaMarkt Zettin, I was leading the whole computing area. So this was primarily the whole on-premise landscape, the whole cloud landscape, all the servers in the stores, and the API management. It was very interesting. And the time was also very insightful for me. But what I personally learned is I love to work with many people. I want to have an impact in not just a single one company. I want to work with more companies. And that's why I switched the sides and I moved to consultancy. I joined a consultancy very recently as a startup where we focus just on cloud. And 1 month ago, we just built up our own startup because we think this area of working with people is on both sides. And what we want to accomplish is we want to build up an environment, we at shiftavenue, where we can provide a home to everyone who is homeless. And homeless means like consultants that are thriving to become better from day to day, that are having issues with the cultures at the end customers, that are eagerly to improve themselves over and over again, and they don't want to stop to grow at some point in time. In many companies in Germany, there is a huge issue. If you are like technically focused or an architect, also the architects, they are limited to a specific degree. So at a specific point, they will not grow anymore. And we are just building up the environment for them so they can work with very interesting people, highly skilled people. We also want to provide a community for everyone who is gaining for the best, and also to allow them to speak on conferences, to participate in communities and all of this. So this is what we are building up. And for our customers, we are very simple. So the one motivation that drives me is I want to drive value at the customers. And this is what we as a company want to do. We want to drive the value as a customer. We don't just want to work with for the customer. We don't just want to create a project and throw it over like every consultancy does. We want to grow the customer. In the best case, the customer will not need us anymore because we want to grow the maturity at the customer. So what we are typically doing in our consultant engagements, we are working with the team from the customer. We are helping them to set some things up. We are working on the strategy level. On the strategy level, we are typically working with CIOs and CTOs. What is a good cloud transformation journey? What is a good roadmap for the next 3 years? How is the current IT maturity looking like? What is the value of IT for the business? And how can we increase the value for the business more? So this is a typical painful topic for CIOs because they are typically just measured in numbers, in costs, because IT is just costs. But IT isn't about costs anymore. IT is about value. IT provides value. Then we are focusing on the architectural area. So we are helping to set up the teams, the organizational structure, on how the teams are working with each other, on how to set up a project management, a program management setup, and also on how to set up an agile methodology. So we are working in an agile methodology. We are working with a DevOps kind of implementation, an agile implementation with so-called feedback loops. So we always want to have like 4 weeks of a feedback loop. So you define a goal, you run through it, you document it, you do a recap, like a postmortem, and then you have been running through one feedback loop. Then you also see, okay, what was the value of this feedback loop? Was this valuable or not? And then you can do the next feedback loop. And by doing so, we also directly train the people at the customer. What does it actually mean to work agile? Because we are seeing so many customers, they are just throwing to us, hey, we are agile, we are using DevOps, and then we join the teams and we are just seeing, no, you are not. Then the last area where we improve our customers is the technology area. And this is always helping the customer to implement things. So we have typically very senior people that help the platform teams and the DevOps or the Cloud Center of Excellence teams to set up the policies, to set up the scripts, to set up, I would say, the cloud foundation, to set up the cloud foundation or the general cybersecurity foundation to work on this on their own. This is what we try to do. We don't want just to work something and throw it over the fence because from our point of view, this is not valuable for anyone.
Yeah, I like that approach. I think it'll serve you well long term, especially to have it be kind of like one of the core values type of thing. But I know we're running up on time here, but I had to ask. I was checking out your LinkedIn and I was reading through it and I was like, oh my gosh, these bullet points, these summarizations are on point. I highly recommend, if you're listening to this, check out David's LinkedIn. It is on point. When did you learn? Because you have 68,000 followers on LinkedIn, which is congrats. That's super cool. Helping out a lot of people, sharing some great stuff. But when did you start to really value that? And I mean, have you always known and had like an on-point LinkedIn, or did that kind of happen at a certain point when you moved into more of a leadership position?
This is actually it's a very long-term story. So I started a couple of years ago, and I still know how happy I was when I was having like the first thousands followers. This was like at the time at Computer Center, so it would be like almost 10 years now. And at that time, I started to share all the things. So I started blogging, and I was typically always an evangelist for don't keep the things for yourself, share with the people, help the people, because then everyone is better in doing the things. And we don't need to keep the information just for us. And with this kind of mindset, I started sharing very frequently on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And over time, I started growing. I always had a focus on PowerShell and security at the very beginning. And now, today, I'm also sharing from time to time some leadership topics, but I'm typically always focusing on stuff that is valuable for the people. So I'm having my own personal knowledge base. I'm on a weekly basis. I have a mechanism built up over the last years. Where to find the stuff, how to categorize it, how to store it on my machine. So I have an Obsidian knowledge base. I need to share this maybe at some point in time. It grew over the past years a lot. I just learned it by doing it. So I started very, very small, and I kept doing it. And what I can just recommend to the people out there is continuity or what was it called? Perseverance. The English term. Yeah. So just keep doing the things when you start doing something, because this is the thing which keeps you making the career. It's not about being highly intelligent, being highly interested in the topic. It's just about continuing to do the things. Just keep on learning, keep on pushing the things. And over the past 7 years, I started to build up my own system. So I have my knowledge base and everything. And I just invest, I would say, 3 hours, 2 hours a week in scheduling the stuff. So I have my own mechanism. A lot of the things are already automated. And the majority of the time, I'm just reading the things. So I'm typically reading, searching for interesting nuggets, and reading the things to keep myself up to date. And when I say, okay, I would say this is good information worth sharing with the people, then I'm already directly scheduling it. And this is just taking me like 2 hours a week. And I'm doing this without a huge reason. My only personal reason is I want to help the people and to share the information because it looks like it's valuable for the people. And this is my only motivation.
It sounds like a book title, Accelerate Your Career in 30 Minutes a Day.
Yeah.
Some good advice there. You be consistent. Don't give up. Keep doing your next thing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks.
So, Jordan, you got some hard-hitting questions, right? You've been kind of sitting on these ones for a while, coming up with the best you can come up with, right?
The common parameters. No one's ever ready for these. Everyone's always nervous. But if you're ready, David, we're gonna throw the common parameters at you. What's one time something went wrong while on the job? How did you handle it, and what did you learn?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't mess up, then you do not work. This is so my typical story. So you will always mess up at this dedicated point in time. The only thing that differentiates the people is how you handle it. So I, at some point in time, I wrote a PowerShell script at one of my customers, and the customer was extremely happy with everything until this point, that everything was running very smoothly. And I learned at this point in time that version control is a good thing. And it is always also good to check the code before running it into production. So I was having a small mistake in my PowerShell script, and I reinstalled, I think, more than 150 machines out of coincidence. So they threw out of the identity, and we needed to reinstall them in SCCM, and this was a huge mess. And it was a huge trouble. What I learned is actually, version control and working professionally and not under pressure and not doing cheaty or cheesy things under pressure is really important. Even if it's very, very stressful, and even if it's very painful, you need to keep your professionality. You need to test your code, you need to validate it, and you need to run it into a test environment before running it into production. And if someone is asking you, they don't have time, they need to make it. And this is something that I learned, and I am always embracing my people to do. Don't just jump on the cheesy, low professional, low quality train because someone is telling you to do so. Keep your professionality level. And your professionality level is, for example, in PowerShell, is the code well documented? Is it tested? Is it properly structured? Is it understandable for everyone? Is it nicely debuggable? Do you have logging implemented? These kind of things. And this is what I would always recommend to people to do. Yeah.
Good advice.
All right. It seems like it leads pretty well into the second common parameter. With everything you know now, what's one tip you'd give your younger self when you're first starting out in IT?
Say it again.
With everything you know now, what's one tip you would give your younger self when you're first starting out?
What would I give myself that I don't know? Maybe, so I was always a little bit lacking the self-confidence. Nevertheless, the career might look different. I was always pushing myself to the highest stress levels, and being also very uncalmness, if I might say this like this. So if I would give me personal advices, just be less stressful. Things go wrong, keep on doing and keep on learning. Then you will be doing fine at some point in time. Very simple.
Yeah.
It sounds very simple. It's not.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
All right, last one. Are you ready for this? What are your 3 favorite modules in PowerShell?
My 3 favorite modules. This is a good one. Pesta, I would say, definitely, because I've been using this one very often. Bloodhound, if I might say, this is a module. And what might be the third one? I'm not sure. I've been creating my own module, which was PS GUI, and this was a very lovely one for me for a very long time, where I was able to create graphical user interfaces dynamically for PowerShell for DAO users. So inventing highly qualitative code and adding a GUI layer on top of it, which is dynamically being built up on top of it. And I invested a lot of time into this. And unfortunately, this is still a topic today. So many admins are still requiring a GUI. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it helps the change management process. So you will have this reluction always in large companies, and having a GUI, even though it's based on PowerShell, might help from time to time.
I like it. You're always allowed to use your own modules. It's always I do like the idea of GUI, not so much for the DevOps side, but sometimes you need user input in some way, and it's a great way to capture.
Exactly. Actually, also the visualization very often is very helpful. I mean, just showing something into a nice graph or into a nice table helps up a lot of the things, and this can help there.
All right, well, David, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we're actually in the presence of greatness. Andrew is the foremost authority on shilling a product. He has people offering him millions of dollars just to teach seminars on shilling, but he won't do it. He saves it all for right now with the PowerShell podcast. Take it away, Andrew.
It's good news for you, isn't it?
Yeah, no pressure. He puts me under no pressure. I always knock it out the park. I've never made a mistake on one of these. But hey, listeners, thanks for listening. David gave us some awesome advice. Hopefully you can apply it to your organization and make some really important changes. I mean, that advice about your topologies and the teams, I think you mentioned a book, David. We'll definitely make sure to get that in the show notes, because that is some huge stuff, like priceless, right? You have many salaries on the line that might be doing things in an inefficient way that's not going to get you to the place where you're trying to go. But amazing episode, David. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for listening. If you're on Apple Podcasts, write us a nice little review. Give us a 5-star thing. Next time we do a duocast, we might read your review out loud. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Leave us a comment telling us what your favorite PowerShell module is and what your favorite command is this week. Not last week, just this week. You can find us on Twitter at PowerShellPod. You can email us, powershell@pdq.com, and we will answer every single question you've ever had. Jordan, am I missing anything? Are we good?
I think you got it.
Awesome.
Perfect. Then thank you very much for having me. It was really nice. And then I'm looking forward to the feedback. Bye-bye.
Yep. Absolutely. It should be live on Monday, but thanks for staying up late to talk to us.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining the PowerShell Podcast with your hosts, Jordan Hammond and Andrew Plough.
They're serious. They mean what they're saying.
The PowerShell Podcast is a production of PDQ.com.